Dear respected Thai, dear Sangha, today is the 26th of March in the year 2017. We are in the Assembly of Stars Meditation Hall of the Lower Hamlet, and today is the New Hamlet Mindfulness Day. Every moment in Plum Village is an opportunity for us to cultivate mindfulness, concentration, and insight. And these are called the three trainings. They're the gist of Buddhist meditation, Buddhist practices. And mindfulness means to bring our mind back to the present moment so that we are aware of what is happening inside ourselves and what's happening around us. And when we are present for what is happening, we're focused and concentrated. And it's being still and concentrated on what we're looking at and focusing on that we can see. We can see deeply. And this seeing is coming from a deep place inside ourselves. It's called insight. It doesn't come from thinking or analyzing or speculating. It comes because we're present. It comes because we're focused, we're still. And in the discourse of the four foundations of mindfulness, the Buddha teaches the different ways to cultivate mindfulness, concentration, and insight by bringing awareness to our body, to our breathing. Breathing is a very important object of mindfulness because the breathing is always there. And the Buddha talks extensively on the practice of mindful breathing, and Thai also. And also, according to the four foundations of mindfulness, the discourse on the four foundations of mindfulness, we bring our attention and our awareness to our feelings, to our mind, the mental formations, which are really the objects of our mind. And I see that the 84,000 different Dharma doors that we have they are all about cultivating these seeds in ourselves, these capacities in ourselves to be mindful, concentrated, and to see deeply, to understand deeply. And mindfulness, concentration, and insight are seeds that are in us, in the depths of our being. In other words, In other words, in meditation, in Buddhist meditation, we don't need to go outside to look for mindfulness and concentration and insight. And that these are capacities that are innate in us. We heard of the store consciousness, right? Last week, Sister Tuệ Nghiêm talked about the store consciousness and how seeds are watered. And so here's a metaphor of our consciousness. It's like an apple. And here is our store consciousness. And in our store consciousness, it preserves and it stores and it holds all kinds of seeds, a whole spectrum of seeds, from the very, very most positive to the most negative seeds in here. And these seeds are inside us in this store consciousness as well. Mindfulness, concentration, and insight are in here. So we don't need to go out there and look for it. All we need to do is come back to ourselves. With these simple tools that we have, the breathing, the walking, being aware of the body, being aware of the feeling, that we can tap into these seeds. And up here is the mind consciousness. These are different functions of consciousness. There are at least 8 different functions of consciousness. This is one of the functions of consciousness. This function, its work is to store, its work is to preserve and to help manifest the seeds. And the mind consciousness, and Sister Tuệ Nghiêm talked about this being like a garden, the soil, where all the seeds are buried. And this is the mind consciousness. It's like a gardener that helps to cultivate the seeds. So we invite the seed of mindfulness up here. And it's like bringing a light into our mind, so that this light can shine in our mind and help us to see. It helps us to see what is happening in our mind, what is happening in our body, but it also helps us to see what's happening around us. And without any judgments, without any thinking, it's pure recognition of what is happening. That's what mindfulness does, is that it just recognizes what is there. And there are 5 other consciousnesses. There's the eye consciousness, the ear consciousness, the nose, the tongue, and the body consciousness. So these are like doorways that helps stimuli to come inside and help touch these seeds in here, so that these seeds will manifest in the mind consciousness. So that's the very basic, and we learn this a lot, so everyone should know this. Because it's very important to understand the working of our mind in the practice, so that we know how to manage our mind, how to manage our suffering, how to manage whatever that's unfolding in ourselves. Because if we don't understand how the seeds are stored and how they are manifested, it's a bit overwhelming. It's the understanding that helps us to manage these things that are unfolding in ourselves. And why is it that we have 84,000 Dharma doors? I mean, how come there's so many Dharma doors? Is it really that we have 84,000 different Dharma doors? So in a class, in our Bhikshuni class, I asked my younger sisters to come up with all the Dharma doors that we have. Each one of the mindful manners and each one of the precepts, it's really a Dharma door. So we came up with a list of about maybe more than 500 Dharma doors. You know, there were like almost 25 of us in the class. And so that's all we came up with, from 500 to 600 Dharma doors. Maybe different traditions have more Dharma doors. But I think this is to say that there's so many of us, and that we have different mentalities, different issues that we need to deal with, and we need different practices to deal with our issues. And it's very encouraging because it means that we can create more Dharma doors. And so in the practice, being creative in finding different ways to take care of ourselves, to deal with and manage with the issues that unfold in our life, it's very necessary, very important. So in my life as a nun, I'm always asking, okay, what other ways can I practice to go through this, to go through what I'm experiencing right now? And because sometimes I realize that I get bored easily. I become desensitized to these tools that I practice every day. They're no longer interesting, and I need something to surprise me. And so we have to create new ways. We have to find different ways to really surprise us, so that we can really stop, to see, stop, to look, stop to breathe. And in the discourse on the 4 foundations of mindfulness, the Buddha says that if we practice mindfulness, concentration and insight, concentrating on the body, the feelings, the mind, and the objects of mind, that we can become enlightened in 7 months. That we can experience highest understanding, we can attain nirvana. But not just 7 months. We can attain and realize the highest understanding in 6 months, 1 month, and let alone 1 month. We can experience it in 2 weeks, 1 week, 7 days, and even within 1 day of the practice of mindfulness and concentration and insight, we can experience highest understanding. We can realize nirvana. Sounds simple, isn't it? Many of my siblings here have practiced more than 1 day, more than 7 months, more than 7 years. Has anyone enlightened? Come on. Raise your hand if you're enlightened. And why is it? Why is it not? But I'm sure we all, I'm sure my siblings, deep bow to my siblings, I'm sure many of you are enlightened to some degree. But there's a brother, he came up here and he announced publicly several times that his purpose as a monastic is not to become enlightened. And the funny thing about, his announcement was that every time he did it, he always apologized to his older brothers and sisters for not setting enlightenment as his goal. And I always wondered and asked, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by enlightenment? I realized maybe we all have different ideas of what enlightenment is. Maybe he probably thinks about having psychic power. Being enlightened means having psychic power or something like that. I don't know. And this is an issue that's been in my mind because that's my goal. I want to become enlightened. And so I have to ask myself, what do I mean by enlightenment? For me, enlightenment means to break through my limitations and my ideas of separation. Limitations that are set up by my conditioning, my upbringing, by society, by my education. By my ancestors. In other words, I feel I'm going through life wearing these tinted glasses. And we all do. We all see the world differently. We all see the world through our conditioning. And enlightenment means being able to put down these glasses and seeing the world clearly. Seeing the world with mindfulness, with just simple recognition without associations with whatever we ever experienced in our life and our ancestors ever experienced in their life, because our ancestors are in us. And so how do we put down these tinted glasses? So I decided that I have to get to the root of this, because I've been long enough in the practice. I want to be able to experience the highest understanding, like the Buddha said. Only 7 months, and here I am 3 times, or even more, 4 times that amount of time. And yet I feel like I'm far from enlightenment, far from reaching the highest understanding. So the whole winter, what I did was that I just had to practice letting go and sit and look inside. I want to look inside to see what is it that have prevented me from really experiencing that highest understanding that the Buddha talks about. And when I sit, what I found is that there's this monkey mind. When I was younger in the practice, it was a loud monkey. And now that I'm longer in the practice, the monkey is still there, but it's softer, it's more subtle, and yet it's like a beehive, in the back of my mind, it's like a beehive that always goes zzz. Later on, if you are in the Upper Hamlet, when the linden tree is in bloom, and you sit under the linden tree, you hear these zzz of all these little bees that are trying to get the pollen. And it's like that. Is that your case too? Maybe not. Maybe I'm the only one. How about you, brother? You have a monkey mind too? Yeah, that's good. I guess we all have this monkey mind in ourselves. That's why we're here, right? So I decided to look, and I spend more time in sitting alone and look inside. And I discovered something that was really interesting. I discovered the culprit of these zzz. And it's part of our consciousness that we don't talk about so much. We talked about these 7 different consciousnesses, but we don't talk about this part of our consciousness that I feel largely responsible for this endless thinking, this incessant thought in my mind. And it's the manas. The manas is another function of our consciousness. And the manas, you see, this is like the ground and the foundation, the base. The mind consciousness and the other 5 sense consciousnesses are evolved from the store consciousness. So is the manas. So the manas is part of, it comes up, it springs up from the store consciousness, and then it comes back down. And it grasps onto part of the store consciousness. As a self. The manas, sometimes we call it the mind. The eyes, when you come in contact with the stimulus, these 2 things, the stimulus, the external stimulus, and the eyes, gives rise to eye consciousness. The same thing with the ears, the nose, the tongue, and the body. The mind, and so the eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, and the body are the base for these consciousnesses. The manas is the base for the mind consciousness. And manas grasp onto part of the store consciousness and consider that as a self, as its beloved, so that it has to protect, adore, and clings onto the manas. So manas is sometimes considered the lover. And manas is obstructed by ignorance, by delusion, so it doesn't see very clearly. And manas is characterized by its wrong perception, its wrong view of a self, that it thinks that we're separate, that it's separate, that it's permanent. And so manas work day and night endlessly for its self-interest and for its self-serving motives. And so when I look deeply into myself, I hear these thoughts and motives inside. Even if it's like really subtle, but that everything I ever experienced in my life is twisted and turned around and becomes like self-serving to solidify this wrong perception of a self. And it makes me feel separated from people. It makes me feel that I'm different from other people. That I'm more special maybe, or not so special, or as special. You know, like these three complexes that Tai talked about. The inferiority complex and superiority complex and the equality complex that we just read before the chanting. They're based in the manas, the strong ideas about a self. And that whether it's a superiority complex or inferiority complex or even equality complex, they all stem from an idea of a wrong idea of a self. And this is what I'm hearing when I sit and look inside. That my thoughts, it's all about self-serving, self-interest. Sometimes in the psychoanalysis we call this the ego. That we do everything, the way we think, the way we act, the way we speak. It's all about solidifying this ego, this idea of a separate self. It's a self that it has to protect, cling to. And then I also realized that deep down inside me, and I think when I see myself, it's also every one of us, because we're very much the same. Our mind is working very much the same thing. It's that we don't want to face what is unfolding in the present moment. Because what's unfolding in the present moment can be really painful and really uncomfortable. Really scary sometimes. That we'd rather think about something else instead of facing this discomfort and this pain that's unfolding in the present moment, or that's threatened to come up in the present moment. And so the thinking is a good way to run from facing the present moment. And it's not something that I intentionally want to do. It's something that I've been trained to do. Maybe not in these lifetimes, but maybe in the lifetimes of my ancestors. It's a very deep-seated habit of running Maybe not physically running, but in here, because he doesn't want to face what's there. And that's the work of manas. Because manas, it's another characteristic of manas is that it avoids suffering. It seeks pleasure regardless of the dangers or the negative consequences. It doesn't want to face the suffering and discomfort. So manas is really good as a way to protect itself. It thinks about something else. It ignores the goodness of suffering. That's another characteristic of manas, is that it ignores the goodness of suffering. And we learned about lotus, the mud and the lotus, that the mud is so needed for lotuses to grow, and yet manas doesn't think like that. Manas just wants lotuses, it doesn't want any mud. And so happiness is made of suffering. And so when it runs away from suffering, it also loses its opportunity to experience happiness. So when we run away from our suffering, by thinking about something, by this incessant thinking and thoughts, we really lose out the opportunity to face what's unfolding, the suffering, and to understand deeply and to transform our suffering. But this is not to say that manas is bad. Manas needs to be educated. And we're actually educating manas with practice. With every moment of our training in the practice, it's about educating manas of this insight of interbeing, the insight of interconnectedness. Because once manas is transformed, once it's liberated, it becomes wisdom. It's called the non-discriminative wisdom. So we don't want to throw away manas either, because manas is the mud that is so needed for wisdom and insight to manifest. And this is really, we're talking about the consciousness, but this is really the whole idea of Buddhist practice, is that we don't want to deny any part of ourselves. And we don't want to throw any part of ourselves away. It's about being present with mindfulness and embracing what is there, so that it's through that practice of being with what's there, even what's there can be really painful and uncomfortable, that we can see really deeply into it, and that's insight and that's wisdom. And so once manas is transformed, it becomes the wisdom of non-discrimination, and that's when it's able to see that there's really no separation. That there is this interconnected inner penetration of all things, that the one is in the all, and the all contains the one. And this is a really deep teaching in Buddhism. And our practice is to be able to experience this, so that we can really transform manas. So the practice is not just to experience peace and happiness, but to be able to transform the roots of our being, the depths of our being. And so how do we practice with this? Now we know that manas is partly responsible, largely responsible for, for our incessant thought, for our wrong ideas of a separate self, for this feeling of separation and isolation. And how do we educate manas so that we can liberate it? So I had some practices that I would like to share. These are practices that I'm practicing right now. They're not very new practices, but I want to emphasize them because I feel that they are very important and sometimes we overlook them. One of those practices is guarding our sixth senses, guarding our senses. I feel some of my sisters, and maybe brothers too, really overlooked this practice of guarding our senses. And even if we are in a monastery, I think it's really important to guard our senses. Because there are things that we see, we hear, may not be very wholesome. Guarding our senses means bringing mindfulness to our sense organs, to our eyes, our ears, our nose, our tongue, our body, our mind. So that whatever comes in, we know exactly what it is. So that it wouldn't come in and water our negative seeds inside in our store consciousness. And I realized that one of the challenges for monastics and also lay practitioners of our time, that the monastics during the time of the Buddha, or even monastics maybe 20, 30, 40 years ago, did not have to face with the social media. You know, from the monastics of the past, from the very beginning, during the time of the Buddha, we like to withdraw from the world. We like to go into the caves. We like to go to the foot of the tree, to the forest, to an empty hut, empty house, so that we can meditate. And it's only when we are able to attain great or highest understanding and insight that we can go out into the world and help the world. But now in our lifetime, the world comes to us at our fingertip. In other words, there's the internet, there's the social media, there's the movies, music. It's available even when you are in the monastery. And you don't have to do anything far, just your gadget is there. And you touch it, all these worlds open up for you. The world comes to you. And it doesn't come to this gadget. Once you turn off the gadget and you're in meditation, it comes up. I was in a solo retreat during the lazy days. And I lived alone in this hut on the hill for 2 weeks. And I realized, I'm used to living with so many sisters, and now I'm living by myself. And at first, I had like these fears that came up. And these horror movies that I had watched as a child had unfolded. I'm like, this is interesting. I haven't watched these movies for more than 20 years. I mean, I watched it when I was a teenager. But they came up and it was as if I'm experiencing these movies again. This fear that comes up like someone's behind me, like putting a hand on my shoulder. Oh my gosh. And so, you know, these things that we watch, these things that we hear, they come up in our meditation. They come up in our quiet time. And I see that's the biggest obstacle to inner peace. And that's the biggest obstacle to insight. Because we're bombarded with so much in our head. Our head becomes really noisy. And most of the time we can't stop them. We can't stop these thoughts. Because we're consuming them every day. And so as monastics, we have to be really careful. You know, with this. Otherwise, for me, I feel I would be defeating my purpose as a monastic. So that's why Thai, in the revised Praktimoksha, Thai had introduced the second body. That as a monastic, when we go up to the internet, now we have to have a second body to protect us, help us guard our senses, so that we're not tempted to go into, you know, sites that could be really unhealthy. I mean, there are things that can be really educational, but a lot of things up there that are really unhealthy for our consciousness, for our body and mind. And so having a second body to go online is really important. And the best thing is not to consume too much of the internet. And that's hard, you know, in our time. And then another practice that we can do is downloading this insight of interbeing, downloading the insight of interconnectedness to manas through contemplation. Contemplations when we breathe, when we eat, when we drink, when we urinate, defecate. I mean, these are times to practice, to see this interconnectedness between ourselves and the whole cosmos. Like this breath that we're taking in. I mean, this breath is so important. This air that comes in. We bring in oxygen in to nourish our body and our mind. This is what sustains us and gives us life. But have you ever thought of where this air is coming in? I mean, where it is coming from? If we stop to see, we can see just within this breath, we're connected to the forest, to the earth, to the whole cosmos. And we're connected to everyone in here because the moment you breathe out, I'm breathing in your air. And when I breathe out, you're breathing in my air. And so it's within our daily daily activities that we contemplate in ways that help us to educate manas, to educate that we're connected, we're inter-are with everything, and that we're not separated. And this is the practice of what Thai call changing cities. That instead of, our mind is always thinking. The mind consciousness, its nature is to think, and to analyze, and to speculate. But we can replace unwholesome thoughts or useless thoughts. I realize that in most of my thinking, maybe 95% or even 90%, 85% or 90% are useless thinking. And so we can replace this useless thinking with thoughts of interbeing, interconnectedness. So we're changing the cities instead of these negative thoughts or unwholesome thoughts or useless thoughts with this insight. So that slowly this insight can come in and it changes manas. It removes the ignorance in manas. And one of those things that we can do is to listen to ourselves. Listen and breathing. Listen and breathing to the discomfort or in this nagging feeling that's happening inside. This nagging feeling that something it's unfolding. Something wants to surface. And it could be really unpleasant. And it could be something that manas is trying to avoid. And that if we stay with it, maybe it will show us what it is underneath this nagging feeling. So breathing and just listening. And so we can, usually what I do is that I sit down and breathe, and then I go to different parts of my body that feels really uncomfortable. And usually I feel it at like this gut feeling, like there's this block that wants to unfold. It's as if there's like something there. And if we can just sit with it and breathe with it, we can see deeply into what it is. And it's the seeing, it's the understanding that helps to liberate. Even if it might still be there, but understanding helps us to remove this feeling of uncertainty, this feeling of being. For me, the biggest suffering for me is not being able to understand. And it's just the understanding already removes a lot of the burden on me with what is unfolding. And so instead of being in our head too much, bring our attention down to our body. And the 4 foundations of mindfulness is a really good place to start with the practice of being aware of the body. The breathing is really important. Just simply coming back to our breathing helps to change the quality of our mind, the state of our mind. And then there's the practice of the mindful manners. I know some of us are quite resistant to the practice of mindful manners, but what they are really is about being aware of our body, being aware of our body as we sit, as we walk, as we stand, as we lie down. These are the 4 different positions. And I realized that if I'm not mindful of my body, which is something tangible, concrete, it would be impossible for me to be mindful of my manas or to be mindful of my mind consciousness. And so the mindful manners are really important. And as novices, we have these mindful manners to practice, but as you become a bhikshu and bhikshuni, they become precepts. Like for the nuns, we have like 115 precepts on the mindful manners. And so these are like really important practices. It's not just to make ourselves beautiful, with the practice of the mindful manners, but it's about training our mind, being aware of the body is training our mind, and educating manas and liberating manas. And so these simple practices, from being aware of the body to being breathing, what is unfolding in our mind, guarding our senses, they're really important tools to help us to become enlightened, to help us to go beyond our limitations and these ideas of separation. And these are also tools that help us to wake up. And this is what we really need so much in our lifetime. Thai has said that for humanity to have a chance, that we really need to wake up collectively. And that our awakening helps the awakening, helps the collective awakening, helps with the collective awakening. And that even if we are practicing in the caves in the Himalayas by ourselves, our awakening affects the whole world. It affects the whole humanity. So that more people are struck by this light of awakening, by this peace that we experience. So maybe we'll listen to the sound of the bell. And let us enjoy our breathing. Let us enjoy coming back and just look inside to see what is there right now in our body and in our mind. And this is the time of the year when we can really go outside and really open up our consciousnesses to allow the beauties of nature to come in and water our wholesome seeds. The seeds of beauties and the seeds of goodness in us, the seeds of awakening in us. And today with the festival, the Plum Blossom Festival, take the opportunity to really look at the flowers, really experience the sunshine on our face and our body. And these are really messengers of wonders that are always there and beckoning us to come back to the present moment so that we can really experience and savor life deeply, so that we can really awaken. So to end the talk, I imitate Thầy Pháp Tiếng. I'd like to read a poem. And this time is for not for the older brothers and sisters as Thầy Pháp Tiếng had dedicated his poem to, but to my younger brothers and sisters. And this poem is also to summarize today's talk. So here it is. I thought Thầy Pháp Tiếng was very courageous to read a poem in front of the whole Sangha, so I thought, I have to do this. I have to do it this time. Because nobody ever read my poetry. I don't share my poetry with anybody. So close your eyes. Yes. Okay. Breathe gently, my dear. Breathe gently, my dear. Walk with feet of mindfulness and eyes of love at every step. Stop to see, reflect, and ask yourself, why am I here? What is my ultimate purpose here on earth? Surely it is not just to play out your mundane humanness. Shake off thinking and thoughts of others and for others. You deserve attention and love. Arriving in every moment is an expression of true love and attentiveness. Love taps into immense peace, into your true self, into your interconnectedness, interbeing and interdependent nature with the whole cosmos, so that you can go beyond all limitations and separation and break through the net of space and time to step into space outside of space and gather lights from the shooting stars to shine on those who need a path of return. And in the deep silence of the heart and mind echoes the voice of wisdom through space and time. So thank you for listening and enjoy your day with the flowers and the sunshine.